Hi, I'm Laura GB, and in this video we're going to look at calculation groups in Power BI and hopefully make them less scary. So let's start with what we're aiming for. Here is an example report showing weather data, and it's got weather for every month, every year, over a whole bunch of stations, and we want to compare this decade to last decade and see what the change in weather is. So in order to do that, would require lots of measures unless we use calculation groups. So let's switch over and get going by building a calculation group. So the first thing we're going to do is go and have a look at the model. And we can see we've got 3 tables, a nice weather data with 2 dim tables, stations and calendar. Up on the home ribbon, we've got a calculation group button. So let's click on there. Gives us a warning about implicit measures, and it does that the first time you put a calculation group into a report. That's fine. Implicit measures are a bad thing anyway. So let's click yes. And there you are, it's added a calculation group to our diagram. Over on the right hand side, you can see it switched us over to the model tab in the data pane. And it's showing a calculation group. And in that calculation group, you've got calculation items, and one is highlighted. And up in the formula bar, we can see it says calculation item equals selected measure. So it's going to replace that with whatever measure we've got in our visual. So I want to change that one to look at this decade. So let's just quick do a switch of the formula. And we can see I've just put selected measure inside of calculate, and I've filtered it to on the calendar table. I've got a decade offset column, set it to 0. And when I press enter there, over on the right hand side, we can see I've still got one calculation item called this decade. So now I'm going to click on the 3 dots on there, or I could do it on the calculation group. And I'm going to go for new calculation item. And there we are, back in the formula bar. And let's do last decade. So there we are, we've got our measure there. And it's just gone for a decade offset of -1. And then one more measure. What's the difference between those? What's the percentage change? So back onto my calculation items, new item. And let's put in the measure. And there we are, we've got percentage change based off of 2 calculations of last decade and this decade. Checking neither a blank, and then do a divide. So that gives us a percentage change. Next step is to use those in a visual. So now let's go back to our report view. And we're going to go for a matrix visual. And in my values, I'm going to add in the 4 values that I'm interested in. Okay. And off that, I am then going to, I don't want them to be across the top. I want them to be down the side. So let's go and have a look over on the right hand side in the format pane. Okay. And what I'm looking for here, and I'm going to do a search, is for switch. And under the value section options, we've got to switch values to rows. So click there, and there we are. Matrix is showing down the left hand side the name of my measures. Great. Now let's add in our calculation group. So if I click on the 3, so if I click on the adding data, and into the columns, I am going to go for my calculation group and click there. And there we are. I've got my parts in there. That works for last decade and this decade. That's great. Percentage change. I want it to be at this end. So let's go, and I also want it formatted differently because that's not a percentage. That's formatted the same way as the measure. So let's fix those 2 things. Firstly, let's fix the order. So what I do is I go back into my model. Over on the right hand side in the model pane, we're going to click on the 3 dots, and then I'm going to go for move, and I can move it up or down, and I'm going to move it to the bottom. And what that does is that populates a column in the calculation item table of ordinal, which orders them. Okay, now go back and look at my visual, and there we are. I've got last decade, this decade, and percentage change. Let's reformat that number next. So back to the model, still on percentage change, and if I look in the properties panel, there is my dynamic format string, and I can turn that on, and then it asks me what I want the format string to be. Now I can enter into there, or if that's a bit fiddly, which I think it is, we can go to the formula bar at the top here, and I can put in my format string. Make sure it's in quotes. So I've done that part. Let's go and have a look at my visual. So there we are. I've got my 3 columns. Great, fantastic. How else could I use this? So let's go into another matrix. And into this one, we're going to list our stations. So on my rows data, I'm going to go and put in the station name. And into my values data, let's go for average rainfall. Okay, fine, great, that works. But I want to compare the decades. So now let's go for the columns, and let's put in that calculation group. And there we are, we get all 3 columns. But maybe I don't want last decade, maybe I can just have this decade and what change was that. So now let's move over to the filter pane and click into here, and I want to have this decade and the percentage change. That works for me. So that's done that one. Last visual, let's do that chart of sunshine. So we're going to go with a clustered column chart. I'm going to, on the x-axis, let's put in our month. And on the y-axis, let's put in sunshine. Okay, so there's our average sunshine by month. But I want to compare the 2 decades. So then we go to legend, and into there, I put my calculation group. And we don't want the growth there because that's a tiny number. So we're going to go back to the filter pane and just make sure we've got in our last decade and this decade. So there we go. In this report, we've added a calculation group, nice and simple, and then created 3 visuals really quickly and without creating too many measures. I'm Laura GB. If you haven't already, please press subscribe. Take care now.